While the country's private sector has helped maintain the country's status as Africa's largest economy, the role of government intervention is critical amid shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war, among others. It's in this light that the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has continued to intensify its intervention programs in the sector. The bank recently said it has disbursed a cumulative total of 4.4 trillion naira in intervention funds to help develop the country's private sector as of July 2022. It further said the cumulative disbursement under the Real Sector Facility for Manufacturers currently was put at 2.183 trillion naira for the financing of 414 real sector projects across the country to serve as an intervention against the impact of COVID-19. How is all of these interventions translating to productive results, and what is the level of impact in the sector? That's a talking point. And joining us to make sense of this is Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, CCPE. He joins us virtually. Hello, Doctor. Good to have you join us today.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you.
All right, good morning, sir. Well, we're looking at this. 4.4 trillion naira has been expended on Nigeria's private sector so far by CBN. What do you make of this claim?
Well, I believe it's something that we should commend, because the beauty of the intervention fund is that they offer funds, particularly to the real sector, the kind of fund that investors cannot get in the commercial banks. It's like a case of correcting what we call market failure in economics, because they offer longer term funds. In other words, funds with long tenure, 5 years, 7 years tenure of fund, which you hardly can get in any commercial bank. And that is the kind of fund that investors need for long-term projects. Secondly, they offer funds at a much lower interest rate. Many of the intervention funds are given at about 9%, single digits. Again, you hardly can get that kind of interest rate in the normal commercial banks. So from a development point of view, particularly in supporting or facilitating production in the economy, I think it's something that one should commend. But whether that is able to fill the huge deficit in terms of demand for credit in the private sector is a completely different matter. But I mean, it has added some value, at least to productivity and to outputs in the real sector of the economy.
All right. Well, there have been complaints, really, that the CBN is abandoning its primary role and playing into some other things. And then I would like to know if this is a correct assertion, or do you think that, well, the CBN is well within its right to do all of this?
Hello?
Can you hear me, sir? Okay, if you can hear me, I was saying there are those who are condemning the CBN, saying that it's playing into the roles of other agencies of government. And I'm asking if you actually agree with this assertion, or you have a contrary opinion, or you feel this is well within CBN's rights to do, development financing.
Well, I think it's complementary. It's complementary. What I think should happen is that it could be fine-tuned, so that the objectives can be better achieved. Because so for some aspects of the intervention funds, particularly the Anchor Borrowers Program, I don't think it has been such a huge success. The default rate is extremely high. I mean, it's as high as 70%. And the last report we had was that over 450 billion are still outstanding with the Anchor Borrowers Program. So I don't think the CBN has the capacity to manage that number of retail lending. That, of course, could have been done better, perhaps through the commercial banks and through all their networks across the country. So there are issues about the implementation, the high default rates, around some of the intervention funds, which is why it is felt that perhaps the CBN should just support the banks and through the banks get these things done. Secondly, it also offers or presents a major distraction even to the CBN. Well, the core function of CBN is monetary stability, price stability, oversight of the banking system, financial system stability. These are the core functions of the CBN. So when the CBN begins to get involved in retail lending, it could be a major distraction.
All right, when we look at... Okay, go ahead, please.
So from the point of view of the distraction that it presents, and from the point of view of the high default rates, particularly those retail lending, I think it's something that the CBN needs to review.
All right. Now, when we talk about the CBN doing all this through the commercial banks, won't that increase the rate and then, maybe probably defeat the purpose, which is to ensure that these funds get to these players, with the lowest kind of interest?
No, it depends. If the funds are made available to the banks at a much cheaper rate, the banks will be able to lend at a cheaper rate. Because this is different from the funds that the banks themselves source. It's not funds that is coming from deposits. It's funds that is coming from the development finance window of the CBN. So the rates are likely to be much lower. Although there may be issues with access because the banks are likely to put more stringent conditions for people to access it. But it is better to manage the fund in a way that will be sustainable and to manage it in a way that over 70% of people are not paying back. So, that is almost perpetuating a mindset that these are just national cake. People collect and they don't pay. And even for some of them, because of the problem of insecurity and all of that, many of them are also not able to repay. So many of them have been chased after collecting the intervention funds. They have been chased out of their out of their farms because of insecurity. So I think it will help if the CBN take advantage of the wider network of the entire banking system and doing this directly.
Well, let me come in here now. You talked about the fact that, some of those funds are not being paid back and all of that. Isn't that an indictment on CBN to start with? Like, how would you give funds to people without being sure that these people have the wherewithal to return these particular funds as at when due? And then number two, really, I think we should just start from this particular one. Let's start from there. Isn't that an indictment on CBN? Can we then trace the people who got these funds? Are we even sure that these people are farmers? If you can hear me, sir. All right, so we're speaking with Dr. Muda Yusuf, and we are looking at the money that has been dispersed. No. Okay, if you can hear me, I was asking you.
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, all right. Now, looking at these monies now that haven't been paid back, I'm asking, isn't this an indictment on CBN? Can the CBN just tell us that, okay, they are not getting the monies back and it just ends there? What happens to the funds that have been disbursed? Apart from those who are probably affected by insecurity, and we understand that, but what of the other people who got these funds? What is the problem? What's happening? Do we have a report on them?
Well, there is no report on that. And that is why there is this suggestion that the CBN should rather step back from that scale of retail lending and allow the commercial banks to do it. Because I think there is a question of capacity on the part of the central bank to be able to implement that level of retail lending. Of course, if you look at the normal commercial bank, the regulatory framework is that there are prudential guidelines. There's a threshold beyond which, if you have non-performing loans, you'll be sanctioned. That's...
Okay. Oh, well, we're talking about non-performing loans. I think to a very large extent, we already heard what he's saying. He's saying that the commercial banks are better positioned to carry out some of these programs, especially because they have the wider network and they can manage the numbers. And not only that, we can also ensure that people do what they're supposed to do with these funds. And people will not even be able to access those funds if they cannot prove that they'll put the funds to good use and at the end of the day return what is to be returned to the banks as and when due. If you can hear me, sir, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so that is it. And for for the ones that are handled by the development finance institutions like the Bank of Industry, the challenge is that quite a number of investors also complain about, particularly the SMEs, is the demand for bank guarantees. And bank guarantees are extremely difficult to get. So that is also posing a major problem of access, I believe, for those who want to secure the facilities of Bank of Industry, for instance. The collateral requirement is very, very strict. And to get a bank guarantee is not the easiest thing. So that is impeding access to these intervention funds, particularly by the SMEs. So what you find is that most of these funds go to very large companies, which is also not consistent with the objective of development finance.
All right, if I get you correctly now, we're looking at the CBN on the one hand, of course, ensures that almost everyone who comes gets it. There is access. But when we look at some of these other banks, the access, of course, isn't as open as it is with the CBN. So we should be looking at striking a balance. Exactly. That's what you're talking about here.
Exactly. There has to be a balance between ensuring access and managing the risk.
All right. Well, let's move away from
the bank. There should be a framework for risk management, but the risk management framework should not be so tight as to exclude the majority of the investors that are supposed to benefit from the fund.
All right. Well, let's look at a chunk of the money went to the real sector support. And my question for you is, what impact has this had really? And do we have results showing for this?
Well, there has been some impact, although not very marginal, I would say, because first, there's still a huge gap in terms of demand for credit. That's between the demand and supply of credit in the economy. The banking sector credit to the private sector is just about 12% of GDP. Whereas in many other economies that are much more advanced, not even so much, even in South Africa and things like that, the banking sector credit to the private sector as a percentage of GDP, in some cases, is as high as 80%. In some advanced economies, it's even up to 100%. So here we are still struggling with a ratio of about 15% or 12%. So there is still a huge gap that needs to be made in terms of providing funding support. But just as you said, in terms of risk management, we need to balance the objective of access and the objective of risk management. There has to be a balance to ensure that we achieve the objective of the funds, and we also ensure the sustainability of these intervention programs.
All right, when we look at these intervention programs vis-a-vis the economic realities, do you think it's in a good ratio?
Come again?
As when we look at these intervention funds vis-a-vis the economic realities, the macroeconomic realities we're having presently in the country, do you think it's a good ratio?
No, not exactly, because apart from getting the fund, many of the beneficiaries of the funds are also facing a lot of challenges. There are some beneficiaries, they have the funds, they can't even use the funds because they can't get foreign exchange to import machinery, to import raw materials and so on. So for some of them, these funds are just lying there, and some of them are paying interest on it. So the point to make here is that a whole lot of factors need to work together to ensure the achievement of the right outcomes.
Now, talk to us about these factors.
To just provide the funds. It is important to ensure that all the other variables that will support the achievement of the objectives are put in place. I mean, if you have a fund, for instance, and you have a big agro-processing plant somewhere in Borno State or Yobe, how are you going to use the fund with the problem of insecurity? Or you have the fund and you need to import machineries and you don't have foreign exchange, how are you going to use the fund? So all of these factors also need to be dealt with. It's not enough to just throw money at issues. We need to ensure that there are also complementary factors, or the environment also needs to be enabling for those who get the funds to be able to take full advantage of that fund and contribute proportionally to the growth of the economy.
All right. Well, you've mentioned insecurity 2 times, especially when talking about agriculture. And then the Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development feels that, well, insecurity isn't so much of a problem. And according to him, he of course understands that it is a problem, but he feels it's not so much of a problem. And he talked about the fact that the federal government already has the rangers who are in the farms who are also protecting the people. Do you agree with him that agriculture, that insecurity is not so much of a problem in that sector? Dr. Yusuf, if you can hear me, I'm asking the minister.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Do go ahead if you can hear me. Yes. I was asking a question.
Yes, it's a very big problem. Insecurity is a very big problem. I've talked to the governor of Benue State, or talked to governors of Borno State and Yobe, and even to some extent, even Kaduna State. They will tell you that insecurity is a major problem for agriculture.
But why is the minister denying that fact?
Well, that is up to the minister to respond. But the reality is that insecurity is a major problem. Look at food inflation. One of the reasons you have the very high food inflation is because of insecurity. But most of the food we eat, it's not as if most of the food are imported. Most of them are grown here. But if you have a situation where many of the farmers are not able to go to farms, some of them go to farms, they go in fear, they go with escorts. We even hear that in some cases, these terrorists are imposing levies and taxes on them. I mean, I think it's like living in denial. Insecurity is, of course, a major problem in our agricultural space.
All right. I think you also talked about the Forex challenge. How can this be effectively addressed in Nigeria, really?
Well, the foreign exchange challenge is a major problem across all sectors. You saw the embarrassment that we faced with the airlines when they said that all their monies are stuck here. They can't take it out, which is not good for our image. If you talk to many of the manufacturers, they are not able to import raw materials to the level that they need to. It is affecting productivity in manufacturing. You know, if you talk to foreign portfolio investors or even foreign direct investors, some of them, they make their profits from dividend that they need to repatriate. They cannot repatriate it. So all of these things are not good for the image of a country that desires investment. So what needs to happen is to see how we can, whatever policies you can put in place to address the issue. 2 issues need to be addressed. The issue of the sharp depreciation in the currency and the issue of the scarcity of foreign exchange. You know, in terms of the scarcity, I think what the government needs to do, particularly the CBN, is to liberalize the foreign exchange market a lot more, to allow the system to be more market-driven and more transparent. If we do that, I'm sure that we will see a very considerable increase or improvement in the liquidity in the foreign exchange market. If we also liberalize the market and allow a lot more inflows to come in through the R&E window, inflows from foreign direct investment, for foreign portfolio flows, from export process, if you have a liberalized market, the inflows will be more. And if you have more inflows, that will increase supply, and that will ultimately bring down the exchange rates. So those are the things that we need to do. We need to also address the problem of oil theft. You know, we get a huge chunk of foreign exchange from oil. If you have a situation where we are losing $2 billion every month, according to the NNPC, that's affecting the supply of foreign exchange. So those are the things to do in order to support the foreign exchange market and improve the liquidity and also improve the exchange rate.
All right, when we talk about foreign exchange, really, one of the things that ensures that we have it in abundance is when we are exporting. So let's look at the agricultural sector now. Do you think enough is being done to ensure that in the area of crop production, we're producing enough self-sufficient and then we're also able to export? Because I want to believe we have some crops that are competitive, where we have competitive advantage. Have we taken advantage of these crops? Are we doing enough?
No, certainly we are not doing enough. We have cash crops like cocoa. We used to have cotton. We used to have palm produce. We have sesame seeds. We have cashew. We have leather products. Of course, we are getting some export proceeds, or we are doing some exports in all these areas, but we are not doing enough because for many of them, they have very serious capacity constraints. They cannot export at a scale that will make them competitive. Then the cost of, managing the exports, the cost of production, the cost of shipment, the problem at the ports, issues of quality and all of that. All of those things are also making it difficult for our exports to be competitive. So there's a whole need for us to invest a lot more in ensuring standards, in improving the capacity of the exporters, in giving them incentives to be able to make sure that they produce properly, and in also improving the logistics. We are seeing instances where many exports, because they are also agro-based, many of them get rotten because of the problem of the ports. Because when you are struggling with a perishable item, 2 weeks, you are still on the queue trying to get to the ports. Some of them suffer very serious deterioration in quality. So there's a whole lot of issues that needs to be dealt with, both from the production to logistics along the entire chain.
All right, very quick. Let's take a quick look at the health sector now. Here, about 133 billion was expended on 129 projects, and this comprises 76 hospitals, and we have 32 pharmaceuticals and 21 other healthcare services. In your opinion, do you think this reflects in the state of our health sector?
Well, it has reflected to some extent, particularly for those who have the ability to pay. Because don't forget, we are talking about private sector provision of health. We are not talking about public sector provision. For those who have the deep pockets, we are seeing, only recently we saw the vice president undertaking a surgery in one of those hospitals that were supported. And we have quite a number of them like that, but they are high-end. They are high-end hospitals. So to some extent, at least that is saving us some foreign exchange. Rather than go abroad for medical checkup, for all of these things, some very rich people, some of our elites, now go to these hospitals to patronize them. I think that is good for that class of people. But for the majority of citizens, I think they are still struggling with access to quality health care. And the way to deal with it is not so much by the intervention funds, it's by ensuring that we move quickly on the policy of health insurance. Make health insurance compulsory for everybody. Everybody should be covered. Whether you are using the public hospital or not, you have to contribute to the health insurance. Right. If they do that, if the government does that, we have a bigger pool of funds to support the entire health system. That, for me, is the way to go to ensure access to quality health by all Nigerians.
All right. Well, looking at infrastructure now, let's talk about power, because power remains one of Nigeria's most critical sectors. And this particular sector was witnessed privatization. That was almost 10 years ago. The CBN noted that over 254 billion naira has gone to discourse. Now, the thing is, so far, since this money has been released to discourse, have we seen any change? Since the privatization, have we seen any change? And as some of these discourse are also being taken over by banks, what exactly is happening here? And how can we solve this all-important sector that has a lot of problems? How can we solve the problems in this sector? Hello, can you hear me? Oh, well, I guess this is a good place to end the conversation. And we've been speaking with Dr. Muda Yusuf, the chairman, CCPE. Many thanks to you for joining us. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll bring you up to speed with some other conversation. Stay with us. Don't go away.